Hello and welcome everyone to another Sales Hacker webinar. This one is actually coming at you from Cusco, Peru. So I think this is probably the first webinar we've ever done from Peru. So we're making history and really excited for this topic. And we got a really good response for this one. So thank you all for joining us today. The title is Good Intentions, Crafting Intent Data into Your B2B Sales Strategy. And so, of course, we're going to be talking about intent data, and we're going to kind of break it down and explain how to effectively implement it into your workflow. Whether you're an individual contributor, manager, leader that's up there making the actual strategy, or if you're an ops enablement professional, we're going to look at it from a few different lenses. And in my opinion, for B2B sales professionals, intent data is becoming a critical piece of their everyday sales process. There's so much noise out there. So now more than ever, it's being used to kind of hone in on buyer behavior and uncover optimal ways to engage prior to their purchasing decision. So that said, we have an amazing two guests today, arguably the best people to talk about this subject that I know. And we're going to help you kind of take your strategy to the next level. And before I introduce these two amazing guests, really quick, just some housekeeping items. So if you've ever been on a Sales Hacker webinar, the reason we do this is to give back to the sales community. So we want to get you involved. So jump on, there's a little Q&A function at the bottom there. Tell us your name, your title, what company you work for, and we'd love to kind of hear from you as well, so ask questions. And if you can quickly do this poll, we'll give everyone about 5 seconds here, so it'll help us kind of frame the conversation as we go. So question is, what best describes your role? SDR, AE, manager, ops enablement, or director level and above? And as we're doing that, and then the final piece of housekeeping, without fail, everyone asks me for the recording. I get about 6 to 8 emails every time we do these asking for the recording. I promise it's coming. It takes about 24 hours for everything to buffer. We'll send it out in a follow-up. All right, we'll close down that poll. Let's see what we got. Scott, Mike, any guesses?
Couldn't venture.
All right. Okay, so interesting. So we have a really healthy representation from director level and above. So a lot of sales leaders are interested in this intent data topic, which makes sense. Ops and enablement is only 6%, which is a little bit lower than I would expect. Managers, 22%, AEs, 28%, and SDRs, 16%. So the vast majority seems like it's sales leadership and then account executives. So that's super interesting. So we'll close that one up. And all right, let's do some introductions. We got one more poll for you, but let's do introductions first. First up, we're joined by Scott Sutton, who is the VP of Revenue Operations at Discover.org and ZoomInfo. Scott, you've got a fantastic name. Welcome to the show.
You as well, thank you.
And just a little bit more color. So as that VP of Revenue Ops, Discover.org and ZoomInfo, Scott is responsible for CRM and the design and implementation of all sales tools and processes. So Scott led Discover.org and ZoomInfo through its creation and implementation of a United Salesforce CRM, supporting 1,000 employees and 350 million in ACV. Before that, Scott spent 10 years working at Daimler with leadership roles in operations, procurement, finance, and data analytics, and studied business analytics at Harvard Business School and holds a BS in business administration and a master's in international management from Portland State University. That's an incredibly impressive background, Scott. So this Salesforce CRM unified adoption, was that post-acquisition then? You led the charge on unifying it all?
Yeah, so we acquired ZoomInfo in the February timeframe, mid-February. As part of that, they were roughly 500 employees. We were also 500 on the Discover.org side. with 2 independent sales forces, about 10 years old each, with each their own automation and kind of their bugs and quirks. And one part of us coming together from a go-to-market strategy as a company, one big enablement factor was getting us all into one CRM, getting all that data cleaned up, having a single-threaded go-to-market strategy. So we spent from about May, we did our first go-live in the beginning of July, and the second wave in August, and now we're fully cut over. So team here just put in tremendous effort, nights, weekends, war rooms, to get that done. So it's kind of once in a career opportunity to do something like that. It was really pretty exciting.
Yeah, I can imagine. That sounds exciting, and then it sounds like just a couple headaches in there as well, I'm sure.
Yeah.
All right, moving on to Mike Burton. Mike is the co-founder and SVP of data sales at Bombora. Mike, welcome to the community.
Hey, Scott. Thanks so much for having me. Excited to be here.
Excited to have you and pick your brain. So, little background. Mike has been working with ad tech startups since 2002. Currently, you're responsible for driving adoption of Bombora's offerings across email marketing, analytics, programmatic display, and predictive analytics and lead scoring, and countless other applications. You actually took on an integral role in building B2B's first intent data cooperative, helping Bombora to consolidate over 9.3 billion monthly B2B behavioral interactions. That's billion with a B. And this consolidation of data fuels massive efficiencies across B2B marketing and publishing. And prior to Bombora, Burton worked with Madison Logic as head of platform sales. You were also Madison Logic's first VP of sales, and you helped them really in the earliest stages to grow revenue and gain a foothold in B2B's very, very competitive lead gen space. And you've also worked at Collective and was one of the first employees at Industry Brains, which is an innovative direct marketing firm that helped shape B2B's early online migration. Again, very impressive background, and I think a perfect brain to wrestle with this topic today. So excited to dive in. We've got that out of the way. The last thing I want to do is, I'm just curious, who is using intent data? Like in the circles I swim in, I'd say a vast portion are using intent data, but sometimes we live in our own little SaaS bubble. So would love to hear, do one more poll, and that is if you're utilizing intent data, yes or no. We'll start that now. All right, you guys have to have some predictions on this one. What do you think, Scott? Are you currently using intent data, yes or no? What do you think the split will be?
Say 60-40 yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mike?
I think similar. I'll go 70-30 yes, and I put a caveat in that there's really, really wide-ranging kind of versions of using intent data. So
Right.
it could be even up to 80% yes, but I think folks are just scratching the surface of how ingrained it can become and how much they could be getting out of it.
Yeah. Cool. All right, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We'll stop that one. All right, interesting. It was actually the inverse of our guesses here. So yes was only 37%. No is 63%. So that's really interesting. And it may be a case of maybe a definition of what is intent data might change that a little bit, but I find that really interesting. Okay, so before we dive into some of these questions, I think as I did that poll question, I think there was a flaw of, what is our definition of intent data? And Scott, I would love to hear yours, and then Mike go with you. How are you defining intent data today?
Yeah, so how I view intent data is really information gathered. In the case, we use Bombora leverage in our platform, but it's really consolidated information from a variety of companies on what they're looking at, what they're searching for, that general pulse on their activity. And then what becomes meaningful is what behavior levels, what searches pop X standard deviations, X% out of their normal behavior. So, I have a growing need in my business for cybersecurity. I'm going to start searching for that. I'm going to look for vendors. I'm going to do research online. You should see me pop in that category. And those vendors out there who are servicing cybersecurity, they'd be very interested to know that I've begun that search and I'm looking for that type of information. So that's kind of my loose definition.
Yeah, makes total sense. Mike, anything to add on top of that? And do you agree with that definition?
Yeah, I do agree with it. That's it. I think we try to boil it down to the simplest common denominator of companies that are researching your products and services, right? So kind of like how you get there and how you use it and the different ways you can look at that data. There's huge variations across all of those things, but the promise of intent data from the highest level is companies that are already interested.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. And extremely important to kind of cut out this noise of, who should we be going after, and something that this is a bit left field, but do you see, Mike, when people are defining kind of their ICP, are they now looking at intent data to inform that decision?
Great question. We have a pretty strong take on this. We consider those two different exercises. So
Okay.
you have a product that has a defined ICP or total addressable market. That's an exercise that should be done separately, and then intent data should be layered on top of that universe, right? Because what you don't want is companies that are showing a lot of the right intent signals, but aren't companies you can sell to. It's not useful. Then there's these companies that their ICP or their TAM it's not defined yet, just because they're not, maybe their market isn't as mature, their product use cases aren't as mature, so they don't quite have that really kind of well-defined TAM. So then they're using intent data across a wider range of kind of green field, and that's okay too, but they are two separate things.
Got it. That makes total sense. Thanks for clarifying that. All right, Scott, I'm going to go with you on this one. In kind of your own words, what's one of the most useful ways intent data aids in a successful sales prospecting process? You mentioned, how many sellers do you have now, Scott?
We have a little over 100 SDRs, about 120 account executives, about the same number for account managers for existing business. So it's 350-ish across those groups.
Wow. So yeah, you've got this perfect kind of petri dish to try things and see a pretty impressive impact, or not so impressive right away. So what's one of the most useful ways intent data aids in kind of your prospecting process today?
Yeah, I think there's two main aspects that I look at, and one is identifying those within your ideal customer profile, your TAM, that show that willing and want to engage. And I think Mike hit the nail on the head by talking about you can take your ideal customer profile and then shine a light on patches of that are ready and the time is right and they're a warm lead, versus pure cold outreach, not even looking. The other piece that I think about that goes in line with that is we're always looking at getting engaged with our prospects earlier and earlier in their buying cycle and have more of an opportunity to insert ourselves in the discussion early and talk to them and help guide them through that purchase process and be a resource for them. So, we say 60% of the process happens in buying in the research phase before anyone actually reaches out to a vendor. So we want to capture them in that earlier phase before anyone else has talked to them and help inform that path. So that's really where we're trying to jump the gun, get ahead, and shine a light on our ideal prospects.
Yeah. I like that. So you've got your defined ICP. Let's say you do really well in the sports industry, you do well with sports teams, but that's a wide swath of people to go after. And then you can plug in this intent data, be like, hey, instead of running a campaign against all of these different accounts, why don't we go hyper targeted on the Oakland Raiders and the Patriots because they're actually searching, and double down, triple down on those versus wasting precious time trying to cover the whole ICP.
Definitely.
And we can help put some numbers on it. So what we find is taking any cohort of accounts. So say I'm an SDR and I have my patch of 500, or I'm a CRO and I have my patch of 10,000. About 20% of that list is showing some intent. And then so call that just the lightest possible signal. And then within that 20%, there's companies showing tremendously strong intent signals, and then all the way down to just a light pulse. And so it's within that 20% that you can choose your scale versus precision, right? Like Scott's sales organization can probably come pretty close to attacking the entire 20% showing any intent because they have the scale. A smaller SDR organization might only be able to handle the top 5% of surging companies or companies with intent. But it's all that to say there's about 80% that, minus some nurture, you could almost ignore, which is a pretty big opportunity to know the 80%, not to focus a whole lot on right now.
Yeah. That's a really interesting point that you brought up, because I talk to a lot of smaller mid-market below companies that are kind of just ramping, and we talk about some of these things like intent data or conversational intelligence or whatever, some of these more complex motions that are happening, they're usually like, oh yeah, we're not there yet. But like when it comes to something like intent data, it's sometimes the less that you have, the less resources you have to go and attack the market. So the more you have to be that sniper versus having a whole army to go and attack. So I think that's a really important point. What would you say to some of those smaller orgs that are like, maybe we're not there yet. We're not complex enough to do something like intent data.
Yeah, I mean, I encourage them to think about things they're already doing. And this outbound SDR use case is a classic example. It's like those brave individuals are coming in every day anyway. They're making the phone calls. They're hunting on LinkedIn. They're using Discover Org and Zoom. They're finding that work's already being done. So you are there. You're doing that work. All we're suggesting is that you start with a new list of companies to prioritize on a given week. So I'd say if you don't think you're there yet, vet the ways that you can enhance what you're already doing.
Yeah. All right. Okay, so what I'm hearing, prioritization is a big one. Allows you to be more kind of precise. Is there anything else that we're missing there that is a really useful way to aid prospecting? And Mike, I'll go back to you on that.
Yeah, I think, once you're doing it, starts with prioritization. It's 80% of the value. But once you're there and you're doing that prioritization, then the actual signal that you're using will give you further intelligence on how to shape that conversation, right? So let's say, hey, they made my list because they're showing a lot of intent. Okay, great. That's why you're on the list. Now, it looks like that intent is on a couple of my competitors. So I'm going to use a competitive talk track, or it's on specific pain points, benefits, use cases. So I'm going to speak to those because I have that underlying intelligence. So it's a little more than a cherry on top. That account intelligence is important from a talk track perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Especially as I'm finding a lot of sales tech and MarTech offerings are getting more complex, right? They're having a lot of different, so much functionality now. And if you go in and you're trying to pitch maybe your main functionality, but they really want you for, X functionality, you could be completely missing the mark. So I like that. Okay, and Scott, I'm going to go with you on this one. How has intent data shaped the way you target these different personas now?
Yeah, so when I think about how we use intent data, and it comes back to even an addressable question around the SMB and the market and how you grow as a sales org. I think in the beginning you have a sweet spot and I can talk to this type of person, but intent data actually can shed light on people outside your ICP as you know it today and go, I didn't even think that recruiters would want to necessarily use my data, or these operations guys would want to use my data. I've been so focused on software, I didn't even think about this. And so for an SDR where your time and your efficiency and that warm response is pivotal, and maybe when you're smaller, you only have a couple SDRs, you need to use that time very valuably. And so to me, it guides them to find new pockets of growth, new pockets to expand into that they didn't necessarily know. And it's not a cold intro into that pocket. They already come in knowing that someone's at least looking at what they're doing. So to me, it's really good to help as you grow your patch of space, as you grow and mature, to find new areas to attack. And you have the benefit, like we talked about, of being earlier into their cycle. So there's a lot of positive benefits. So we've programmatically put in steps where we have a staff that's pulling all of our latest flags on a weekly basis of all of our flags that we're tracking. So our mentions, competitor mentions, lead gen, all of these things, and immediately throwing them into a campaign, getting behind them. But at a point, early on, we had to be a little bit judicious with our time. Now it's just get after every one of those. If our CEO sees that someone comes up on that list and they haven't gotten a call, you should expect to hear about it, because those are they're softer than half the stuff we're calling to anyway. So to me, it's very valuable. It's just almost another lead source.
Yeah. It's interesting, as you were saying that and talking about kind of, it gives you an opportunity to almost increase your TAM, or at least identify new personas and industries. I remember way back in the day when I was first starting my career as an SDR, I had my top target accounts, and then I would overlay that on a very rudimentary. We had this plugin that could just tell us who visited our website, and it would be like Coca-Cola was on your website. Well, there's 10,000 employees at Coca-Cola, but I would just hit up my personas and be like, hey, someone was on our website. I'm trying to track them down because they're probably struggling with this problem. Can you help me? And it was actually extremely successful for how rudimentary it was. And when I look at what we're able to do now with intent data, it's a similar thing, except just much more precise. I think that's interesting. Mike, anything to add on top of that?
Yeah, I think about how you can create different signals for different personas, right? So I'll just walk, examples are easier. So if I have budgeting software, and part of that, the benefit or the target persona is a sales leader who can do pipeline management, and then another persona is a CFO who can do accounting, compliance, and business planning. Create two different intent signals using different topics for these different features and benefits. And then if you see Coca-Cola is surging on your CFO or your finance topic area, well, then to hunt into the finance personas. But if you see pipeline acceleration, pipeline management, et cetera, to hunt into the sales leaders at Coca-Cola. So you can play with signal creation to get as almost like a proxy for persona, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it makes sense. Can you dive into that a little bit more? I just want to make sure I have it framed and that the rest of the community. Yeah.
Sorry, I got a little bombarded there. But so if you think about when we're surfacing intent data, what we're doing is we're creating signals.
Yeah.
So let's say I want to create a signal for companies that are in large research spikes, or what Bombora calls surges, on topics related to budgeting, accounting, compliance, et cetera. Right, that is a signal. So if we see Coca-Cola pop through that signal, we know to hunt into the finance personas, because it's not our sales leaders that are surging on those topics. We just know that. And vice versa, if they're surging on those pipeline topics, we know to hunt into the sales leaders. Is that more clear?
Yes, makes total sense. So you're almost like creating a funnel. So you'd have, instead of just, hey, Coca-Cola is ambiguously searching, it's, hey, they're searching for this specific surge, which informs you to go and attack this person.
Yep.
Okay, makes total sense. Okay, let's dive into those kind of behavior signals then a little bit. So we talked about researching the topic, going through these different things. What are the types of kind of behavior signals you look out for with intent data? And Mike, I'll start with you again.
Yeah, so again, in our world, we're listening to companies and their kind of relationships with consuming topics.
Yeah.
Right? So think about creating these signals. What we do is really simple. We take a bunch of topics that are related to a thing. So, at Zoom Discover Org, they're doing this as well. They're looking at topics like Discover Org, lead generation, sales acceleration, all of the topics and concepts that are related to their product. And Scott can probably talk about how sophisticatedly they're doing that. But broadly speaking, you can create any signal using these topics. So you may want a signal specific to all of your competitors. So you would look at a group of topics all related to your competitors to find out if there's company surging on your competitors specifically. And any derivative kind of pain point or benefit or use case of your product, you can create a signal around. A lot of times, it's just a blunt force object. It's one big cluster of topics that's related to what you're trying to sell, and that's enough. But if there's more nuance to your go-to-market, then you can create multiple signals.
Got it. Scott, I would love to hear what that looks like in action at Discover Org ZoomInfo.
So just an interesting metaphor on kind of how we use it, but multiple points of confirmation or multiple signals give you different pieces of information about what's really going on. So I think about an example. If I just give you the information of someone is running, they're running, you don't know why they're running. Are they running away from someone? Are they running for exercise? Are they running to someone or to get somewhere? Then if I give you another piece of data that says they're wearing athletic clothing, you're another layer informed about what's going on. And then you say there's a crowd and spectators. You have a pretty good idea they're at a race and they're running. So we think about this at multiple points of confirmation in the data. I think about it with security. If you're looking for security, is that physical? Is it digital? Is it personal security? What does that look like? So for us, if I make a press release that says Discover Org bought ZoomInfo, immediately the Discover Org and ZoomInfo topics would naturally surge. So I look for these lead generation, I look for demand generation, all of these other corresponding elements that say, this is really what this person is after. They're not just randomly searching us because maybe they're an investor and they're wanting to know what's going on in the space, or they're an analyst. Are they really a buyer? So that, to me, those multiple points of confirmation, they paint that rounded picture. So more and more we're looking at, are you firing on multiple signals at once? Do you meet our target profile from a firmographic, technographic, and overlaying all those things together? And then it paints this pretty amazing picture without ever having talked to the prospect about what they're trying to do, who they are, and what their persona is.
I like that. I am for sure stealing that metaphor anytime intent data comes up now. And it's a good way to kind of break it down in layman's terms. I like that. Okay, so we talked a lot about intent data, some of the useful ways you can use it for prospecting, specifically maybe kind of informing your ICP or your TAM. And we have just a quick clarifying question from Shaheen. Shaheen, thank you for the question. I think we went over this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So how representative is this type of intent data of your total addressable market? Like, can you just rely on this intent data and be like, oh, these people are searching it, therefore that must be my total addressable market? My first thought is, no, you need more motions than that. But Mike, how would you respond to that?
Yeah, good question. So I think first things first, broadly, answer the question of what does your ICP look like from a company size perspective? If it's extremely small businesses, then no, this is not representative. There's a really good chance that any intent flavor cannot track with any accuracy very small businesses. So that's that. But then once you get up over, 25 employees, certainly over 50 employees, and most definitely over 100 employees, then you're like, okay, intent data can be tracked. So there's really, 80, 90% chance that there's a signal on the companies in your market. And then I'd say it comes down to your appetite or capacity to act on the data. If you can act on any intent signal at any level, then you're good. You're catching any potential buying activity. But if you have limited resources, limited sales people, limited marketing budget, and we'll get into marketing use cases a bit, I'm sure, then you just need to rely on the strongest signals. And you're going to miss some legitimate buying activity that just doesn't register as strongly. right?
Mhm.
So it just comes down to your capacity to act on the data.
Yeah, yeah, I would agree. And I also think there's a piece there of, in your TAM, there's always going to be people who don't know that they need your product or service yet, right? That you have to go out and inform.
Fair. Yeah. So there's
Scott,
still,
any
instead of creating demand, harness demand, right? There's demand that already exists. So go harness that. But I think you're right. There's still, if you can create demand and tell somebody they have a problem they didn't realize they had, that nobody's saying don't do that. But harness demand tends to be much easier.
Yeah, I like that. Harness the demand. Don't rely on just having to create it. Scott, any additional thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it can inform the TAM, and it can give you an idea of where to look. If I imagine your TAM based on pure demographics or firmographics or whatever, it's kind of a two-dimensional picture, a silhouette of who your customer is. To me, the intent is more like the third dimension that like shines a light on that whole picture and says what pockets of that TAM are the really interested ones, because your TAM can be huge, but there's varying levels of motivation across all of them. So I want to identify on the peaks and hit those and dig into the hard to find, less motivated in a second step. So I think it's an independent exercise. Intent doesn't give me how many are there of that. It just gives me how hard are they looking. And so those two things, you can't get to your TAM. It's more analogous to your ICP than your TAM. I don't think you can measure your TAM with intent. It can help shine a light on pockets. But to me, it's more of this third dimension that gives you another layer of intelligence about what your TAM is doing.
Yeah. Takes your 2D TAM to maybe a 3D level and helps you interact with it better.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about some misconceptions, because like anything that's kind of a little bit newer, there's always massive amounts of misconceptions out there. And Scott, I'll go with you first on this one. Or no, actually, Mike, you're probably better to answer this one. What are the biggest misconceptions you see about intent data as it relates to enhancing the sales process?
Yeah, I think misconceptions is probably a strong word for a couple of these, but kind of points of that could use more crisp clarity, I think, in the marketplace in general. I mean, one would be, we've already covered, is intent data for prioritization, or is it for account intelligence? Right? Is it because I want to know what this company cares about when I get them on the phone? It's like, yeah, that's a nice benefit of intent data, but it's for prioritization. It's for prioritizing your outbound efforts, right? That's the core meat on the bone value, is, spending time talking to companies that are already interested in what you sell. If along the way, these surge signals and the specific topics give you account intelligence and make you smarter, awesome. But that's kind of a secondary benefit, whereas I think some folks flip that. So the other thing, and this isn't so much a misconception, it's just, hey, does intent data live in sales or marketing? Is it mostly for marketing, but sales can get a little benefit, or is it mostly for sales and marketing can get a little benefit? And I think some of that depends on if you're an inbound or an outbound sales organization, frankly. But more and more as our market matures, outbound sales is a big chunk of the value. I'd say 70 to 75% of the value is in outbound sales prioritization, whereas optimizing email, paid advertising, paid social advertising, the marketing use cases is probably just 25% of the value. So I'm not sure that's as well known either. So just this idea that, if you adopt intent data, making it work in sales is probably where you're going to get the most value.
Yeah. I think that naturally kind of leads to the next question that I wanted to ask, because we talked about prospecting. There's this marketing use case. And Scott, I would love to know how you're using intent data at Discover or ZoomInfo to improve your lead scoring. So marketing's lead scoring, and how you're using it to nurture leads as well.
Yeah, so we have a pretty great program from our marketing side here that's surfacing new accounts for us all the time, and this is a major part of that. And so in a smaller company, oftentimes the SDR is required to figure out who the right client is, go find them, call them, get the information, search the web, all of these things. Our marketing team is surfacing all that and basically giving our SDR team warm prospects that are cold, but kind of this pseudo warm leads to call into. And based on using intent data, it really is another buying signal. So whether it's account scoring or lead scoring, inbound lead scoring, I've come back to this multiple points of confirmation. So if I know that you look like my target customer, you are the right title for the right kind of persona who has buying influence, you're actively looking, your company's looking, that's really powerful. And it gives me something to talk about too. And even the tangential topics, we talk about painting this picture. If I look and I say, okay, they're doing a headquarter expansion, it looks like, and they're firing on all these different signals, you can actually lead in that conversation or send them content that's relevant to what they're going through. Hey, it looks like you're going through a major relocation. We help companies like you do X, Y, Z. That must be really hard. We're always looking for that thing to talk about and that thing to engage them and understand their personal struggle and what they're going through. Like when I was going through the Salesforce project, if someone came in and was like, oh man, that resonates with me, and they hit me on that, I would probably talk and I would engage with them because that's my reality. That's what's keeping me up at night. So it just exposes more of the background context and the humanity behind all of it when you're contacting, prospects.
Yeah. So it can kind of help you further inform your messaging. And then I'm also hearing almost like it gives you information of who's worthy of going through maybe a 16-step sequence with, and because they've hit all these things, and we know that there is intent there. So let's kind of double down. Okay, kind of one of the last use cases I want to talk about, because I have a personal opinion that I think this is going to become more and more important given the SaaS business model, and I think customer success is going to get more dollars thrown at it, more headcount, and more everything over the next few years. Mike, how does using intent data help keep your existing customers interested in your initial sale, and then look for cross-sell, upsell, all these things, which again I think is coming quickly in the future. More attention to this side of sales, because it is still sales.
And those are the positive use cases, but there's also churn and flight risk in the same family.
Right.
Intent data can be layered on top of any list of companies, any cohort of companies. And of course, a really important cohort of companies is your customers. So you can layer a signal on top of your big list of customers that says, hey, there's some of them that are researching our competitors. And let's say they're within 3 or 4 months of their renewal. Well, that's something that should be prioritized. And certainly in a multi-product company, a certain percentage of your customers are showing intent activity on other things you sell. So those can be signals that are acted on. It's really the same exact use case as an outbound sales use case. It's just starting with a different cohort of companies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they could be searching a functionality that you have that they just don't know you have. Or, like you said, the flight risk. They could, if they all of a sudden start searching your competitor like crazy, well, let's fly to them and figure out what's going on. That's cool. Okay, let's go quickly to the community again. We've got a question, and Mike, this one specifically for you. Maybe it's for both. Laura, if you can let me know, because Laura wants to know, where exactly are you getting this data from? Is it a mix of search and social, or where is it coming from?
Yeah, so Bombora operates a large cooperative, which is made up mostly of large B2B media companies. So think about the biggest premium business sites that everybody knows, like the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, Bloomberg, Business Insider, Inc. and Fast Company, those big premium business sites, as well as thousands of much more granular niche B2B research sites. So effectively what we've done is we've built one-to-one relationships with all of these big B2B media companies. and they allow us to monitor all of the research that's taking place across all of their properties. And then over time, the constituents have grown, so we're also able to see signals from vendor sites themselves who have joined the co-op, lead generation companies that see a lot of white paper downloads. So kind of the long story short, it's just a big ecosystem of places where B2B research takes place, and Bombora is able to monitor all of that inventory for these research signals.
Makes sense. That's interesting. I didn't even know that. That's cool. So thanks for the question, Laura. Okay, this is the final question I want to ask, and then I'll kind of shut up and let our community drive. This is, so when we did the poll at the beginning, we had a lot of individual contributors. I think it was something like 38% or 28%. So I'll ask both of you this question. Scott, I'll start with you. What are some best practices you would recommend to sales professionals who just started incorporating intent data into their strategy? Let's say their manager just came like, hey, we've got this thing, we're using it. How can I harness it as an individual contributor?
Yeah, so, I would look at the specific use case, assuming you're an AE or an SDR, like on the new business side. To me, Mike talked about prioritization, about using your time efficiently. And to me, it's, I would layer that data into whatever list I'm calling into, my territory, whatever patch I have of the world, and use that to prioritize my time. And I think keeping track of that data, putting in what intent data keyword, for instance, fired, and then over time you can run win rates on those certain topics, and that helps to build a strategy. So I would say one is just to use it and hop in and embrace it and try to, over time, figure out anecdotally what works best for you, but then document it and keep it in your back pocket so you can run some numbers at the end of the day and say, statistically, I know that this is the best way to go. And these are the topics that are firing most often for me. And then that'll help inform things like lead scoring. As you push this to the next SDR, the next AE, you can give them, some confidence that this methodology works and is founded in, something more than just, it seems like a good idea.
Yeah. Great points. Mike, anything to add on top?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just reiterate what Scott said earlier, because it's probably the number one best practice, at least with Bombora, is looking at companies that are surging on multiple topics, right? Mm-hmm. So to use an example, let's say I sell a CRM platform. Well, there's probably 20 topics that Bombora tracks that are really relevant to CRM. Microsoft Dynamics, Salesforce, CRM management, CRM hygiene, etc. And a company surging on one of those topics, that could be right. That can be noisy, even if it's the perfect topic. But if you find a company surging on 6 or 7 or 8 of those topics at the same time, it's such a strong signal that you can kind of have a lot of confidence in the efficacy of the data. And then to Scott's point, you're going to get great intelligence on what those topics are at the same time and be smarter. So I just say start with a strong signal. Don't just start kind of willy-nilly or just any intent topic you see tagged to any account. Be thoughtful about it. Make sure you're calling on a strong, credible signal, and then you can always broaden or widen the volume from there.
I think one other comment on that I do want to bring up for a first-time intent user is the way you implement it in your talk track is important. If you go, I know you're looking for this. Right. It comes across like, whoa, that's a little creepy. Like, how do you know that? Why do you know that? And I think using it more in your back pocket and doing discovery and let them surface why they're searching and how that came to be from their words. And you're going to know more and you're going to get a more rich context for their world asking that question versus just surfacing, I know this about you.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, Mike, anything to add on messaging? Like how can we harness it without being creepy?
Right, and the whole idea is we're trying to get them early. That 60% that isn't talking to you, but is in in some type of a process. We're trying to get to those folks. So the promise of the data is not that they are overtly in market every single time. It's that instead of taking a 3-point shot, you can take a really nice baby hook runner coming down the lane, that you can hit 60% of the time instead of 20% of the time. So if you just look at it as that really good prioritization and intelligence without thinking that you have this silver bullet, then you can actually use it at a scale that'll be really effective.
Yeah, I like it. So let's dive into that a little bit because it's actually really interesting. So do you, Scott, I'll go with you on this one. So does your team, you've got this like juicy piece of intent data and your team's foaming at the mouth. You just keep that in your pocket and it informs your messaging and you're never going to really call it out. You just are playing with a kind of a secret advantage. Is that the way you look at it?
So I generally we would do normal discovery, but we'd have that in our back pocket. There's one use case, and I think you have to figure this out. In our specific case, since we have the list, we have the data, and we also are selling an intent product embedded, via our partnership with Bombora, there is a talk track that says, I know who's looking for you, and they're searching for you. And it's not like you're searching for this. And it's a nuance because it's, I know something about someone else who's searching for you. And that feels better than I know what you're looking for. So there's only a couple of times when we surface that intent piece. And it's more in, I know something that you don't know about your prospects that you need to know. And so that's the one use case where we would incorporate that. And there's a really powerful talk track there. But yeah, generally, it's like playing poker where you know maybe one of the cards. And maybe it's informative or not. Like it's a 2 of spades, who cares? But if it's the ace, that's really important. And so that's kind of the way I think about it. But if you tell them you know it, it's over. They're just going to fold. So to me, it's one of those where let them give the tells and just keep it to yourself and make you more informed and more powerful.
I like it. Scott with the metaphors, man. I love these. The poker one was solid. That's really cool. No, I love that. So it's still surfacing it, but it's not like, hey, I know this about you. It's like someone knows this about you, or this is what people are. Yeah, that's cool. Okay, let's go to the community. We got a couple of minutes left for some questions, and we've had some great questions already. So thank you, everyone. All right, so first one comes from Sarah. Sarah, thank you for the question. Her is, how can I sell the idea of intent data to my manager? Well, show them this webinar. Mike, Scott, if you give kind of the elevator pitch, if you guys are both sales leaders, if you weren't involved in this world, what would get your ears pricking up? If your rep came to you, what would they have to say? Mike, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple really simple ways. One, just like a semi-plug, but on the Bombora website, you can have 10 free surging companies every week. You can put in your account list and get back the top 10 surging companies every week. So I'd say just start using it and get some wins, and that way you're just using data and saying this stuff works and we should have more of it. If you kind of like thinking about adopting it and you want to sell it through, just build a plan to test it. Right. So if let's say you're starting with the SDR outbound prioritization, what is a good week in terms of number of opportunities set up from that team? Build a plan and work with the provider to figure out how much you can lift that number of opportunities per week. And then you have something to measure against and you can high five when you hit that number. If you don't have a plan and you just say, well, things should get better because we have this data, even if you bring it in and it seems successful, there might always be a little uncertainty unless you know how you're going to measure it.
Yeah, I like that one. That one's worked well in my career. I remember purchasing my first sales nav license on my own, and I built the use case out of results. Scott, anything to add on that?
Yeah, I mean, we do the same thing, or we offer, a way to test and try it. And I think that's wherever you can find that, the ability to get your feet wet with little risk and show some of the efficacy before diving in, that's fair. To me, it all comes back to efficiency of time. And, it borders on the whole pitchy piece, and I don't want to be selling a product or anything here because I want you to make a decision, but we're all about speeding up, people's ability to close deals as an individual and use their time more effectively. And this is just one of those things. You pay a lot of money to your salespeople, and if there's ways to make them more efficient, that's the use case that we pitch to decision makers. And in this case, it's the same one you would pitch on your manager. Like, if I know I can sell more based on a trial like Mike mentioned or whatever, that's going to be really compelling. At the end of the day, they're in there to sell more with less overhead and speed up the sales cycle. And that's at the end of the day, the argument.
Yeah, that's great. And we've got another question that's similar to the same vein, sorry. So this is from Phil. Is it possible for individual contributors to use Bombora or Discover.org on our own rather than it being enterprise-wide? And short answer is yes. Is that fair? Scott, Mike?
Yeah, the closest thing that we can offer for an individual contributor is the free product that I mentioned. And I would just encourage you to use your own account list, right? It's like, that way, whatever intent data you get back will be from your patch of accounts that you care about. But yeah, to encourage any individual contributor that just wants to see their top 10 companies to use it that way. And, certainly if they want more than that, they would need to engage on a company level, but it's a great way to start.
Yeah. And Scott, similar, you guys have a trial of sorts that an individual contributor could run?
Yeah, I mean, if you're generally we deal with like whole sales teams. We don't do individual with the Discover.org or ZoomInfo as often. There's some use cases, but I think Mike's point is really good. We often talk about there's the one sales guy who gets the leg up, and then it becomes the team best practice. And so if you're the guy who's really hungry, staying late at night, you go on to Bombora, you start searching your topics, you find those people out there. People are going to notice. People are going to see, hey, what's this guy doing? And that's when, unfortunately for that rep, but fortunately for their company, everyone takes it and they run with it and they get better. And so it's one of those things where that first guy gets the leg up and has wins, and then it becomes apparent that that's just the right thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, one last question, and we'll wrap up here. And this question comes from Reggie. This is a great question. Reggie wants to know the future. So, Mike, what's next in the world of intent data in your eyes? Where are we going with all this?
Yeah, I mean, for us, you can always consolidate more of this research behavior in one place, right? So let's say it's really, really hard to quantify this, but let's say right now we can see, 60% of B2B research activity. And this data is already pretty good. If we could get 70%, 80%, the data just becomes more and more powerful. So that's just foundationally always trying to consolidate more and more of the research behavior so that the signals can become stronger. And then the other kind of like next, and this is tactical stuff, but the next frontier is just better data delivery. We have customers now, implementing this data through Salesforce into Slack so that reps are getting automatic alerts, or it's being used via, companies like Conversica, where it's being implemented automatically. So there's just a lot more we can do in getting the data out kind of into the capillaries, into the front lines really elegantly and at scale. We're really just at the beginning of that.
Yeah. It's gonna be an interesting world. My view on that I'm probably an uninformed view, but if you look at what B2C is doing and how strong some of that intent data is, I think we'll get there in the B2B realm, in the not too distant future. Scott, thoughts on the future of intent data and where we're going?
Yeah, so what I think is really compelling is how can we leverage it with AI and machine learning to better inform our scoring models and our account surfacing models. So we're trying to encode data points of what was the intent 90, 45, 30, and 15 days before a purchase decision, a demo, and then back tapping that and saying, if I see that same signal now, what's the likelihood they're going to buy in 45, 15, 30 days? And looking and having that be a programmatic model that we can run to even isolate within that patch more, and using multiple signals at once in concert with historical win rate data to predict the future more and understand who's really in a buying cycle. And that's, to Mike's point, is like you're getting a little bit of a shade of what's going on, but with these models, can you really actually predict what the picture looks like in reality with a model?
Yeah, yeah. So actually using an AI overlay to this intent data to actually help you inform your forecast and predict the future of your revenue.
Yeah, we always stand back, and when major things are announced in the news, you look 30 days back into Bambora and you say, oh, that was spiking, that was spiking. So how do you take not a one-time event, but a sales cycle, which is a reoccurring event, and try to predict that reoccurring event over time?
Yeah, yeah. That's interesting. So almost predicting the signals before they even happen. Like we all know, if you raise a big round, you know that they're going to need they're probably going to need some hyper growth. They're going to buy some more tools. So a lot of people reach out when that's announced. But imagine if you could predict based on all these buying signals, be like, hey, they're about to announce a round. Let's hit them up before the rest of the world does. Yeah, that's cool. I like it. Well, I'm excited for the future. I think it's going to be a very interesting one. I'm excited to be in this sales tech realm. Well, gentlemen, Mike, Scott, thanks for hanging out with me today. You guys are an absolute wealth of knowledge, and we'd love to have you both back in the future to see if some of those future things came to pass. And to everyone in the community, thanks for the thoughtful questions. Thanks for hanging out, and have a great rest of your week.